Magic, white and black, the science of finite and infinite life. Chapter 10. Creation. And God said, "Let us make man." Bible. The most important question that was ever asked, and is still asked with anxiety and often with fear, is the same that was propounded thousands of years ago by the Egyptian Sphinx, who killed him that attempted to solve the riddle and did not succeed. What is man? Ages have passed away since the question was first asked. Nations have slain each other in cruel religious warfare, making vain efforts to impose upon each other such solution of the great problem as they believed they had found. But from the tombs of the past only re-echoes the same question. What is man? And yet the answer seems simple. Common sense, if divested of religious or scientific prejudices, tells us that man, like every other form in the universe, is a collective center of energy, a solitary ray of the universally present divine light, which is the common source of everything that exists. He is a true child of the great spiritual sun. As the rays of our sun only become visibly active in contact with dust, so the divine ray is absorbed and reflected by matter. It mingles for a while with matter and draws up towards the sun such elements as are sufficiently refined to escape the attraction of Earth. The sun ray plays with the waves of the ocean. The heat created by the contact of water with light from above extracts from below the refined material, and the vapors rise to the sky, where, like the ghosts of the seas, they wander in clouds of manifold shapes, traveling freely through the air, playing with the winds, until the time arrives when the energies which keep them suspended become exhausted, and they once more descend to Earth. In a similar manner, the divine ray of the spiritual sun mingles with matter while dwelling on Earth, absorbing and assimilating whatever he chooses or what corresponds to his needs. As the butterfly flits from flower to flower, tasting the sweets of each, so the human monad passes from life to life, from planet to planet, gathering experience, knowledge and strength. But when the day of life is over, night follows, and with it follows sleep, bringing dreams of vivid reality. The grossest elements remain to mingle again with Earth. The more refined elements, the astral elements, which are still within the attraction of the planet, float about, driven hither and thither by their inherent tendencies, until the energy which holds them together is exhausted, and they dissolve again in the plane to which they belong. But the highest spiritual energies of man, held together by love, freed from the attraction of Earth, ascend to their source like a white-robed spirit, bringing with it the products of its experience beyond the limits of matter. Man's love and aspiration do not belong to Earth. They create energies which are active beyond the confines of the grave and the funeral pyre. Their activity may last for ages until it becomes exhausted, and the purified ray, endowed with the tendencies impressed upon it by its last visit to the planet, again seeks association with matter, builds again its prison house of animated clay, and appears an old actor in a new part upon the ever-changing stage of life. Some of the greatest philosophers have arrived at a recognition of this truth by speculation and logical reasoning, while others, whose minds were illuminated by wisdom, have perceived it as a self-evident fact by the power of intuition. To build the new house, the impressions gathered by its previous visits furnish the material. The slothful rich man of the past may become the beggar of the future, and the industrious worker in the present life may develop tendencies which will lay the foundation of greatness in the next. Suffering in one life may produce patience and fortitude that will be useful in another. Hardships will produce endurance. Self-denial will strengthen the will. Tastes engendered in one life may be our guides in another, and accumulated energies will become active whenever circumstances require it during an existence on the material plane, either in one life or another, according to the eternal law of cause and effect. A child may burn its fingers by touching the flame, and the adult may not remember all the circumstances under which the accident occurred. Still, the fact that fire will burn and must not be touched will remain impressed upon the mind. In the same manner, the experiences gained in one life may not be remembered in their details in the next, but the impressions which they produce will remain. Again and again, man passes through the wheel of transformation, changing his lower energies into higher ones, until he has attained knowledge by experience, and he becomes, what he is destined to be, a god. There is a certain stage in the spiritual evolution of man when he will become self-conscious in the spirit. He will then remember the events of his previous life, but to remember them in his present state of imperfection would be merely a hindrance in his progress. It has been said that by not remembering the errors of our past lives and their evil consequences, man is liable to commit his previous errors again. But we ought not to do good merely as a matter of speculation and to avoid evil consequences resulting therefrom, but from an inherent desire to do good, regardless of what the resulting consequences may be. Man, like the majority of organized beings, is an atom in the immensity of the universe. He cannot be divided and still remain a man. But unlike other and lower organized beings, whose realization of existence is confined to the physical or astral plane, that which constitutes him a man and distinguishes him from an animal is an integral and conscious part of the highest spiritual energy of the universe, which is everywhere present. And his spiritual consciousness is, therefore, not limited to a certain locality in the physical world. Who made man? Man makes himself during every day of his life. He is his own creator. The clay, the material body that clings to the ray of the manifested absolute, is taken from earth. The energies, called the soul, are the products of the astral plane. The highest energies, called the spirit, belong to heaven. Animal man, like the lower orders of nature, is a product of the blind law of necessity and may even be produced artificially. As such, his mother is nature, the ever-immaculate Virgin, who presents time-born man to his father, the infinite spiritual principle, to be transformed into a god. The physical attributes of the child and its mental qualifications are the result of inheritance or previously existing conditions. Like the tree that can send its roots into the neighboring soil and gather the nutriment by which it is surrounded, but cannot roam about in search of food at distant places, so physical man has only a limited choice in the selection of such means of development as he may require. He grows because he cannot resist the law of necessity and the impulses given by nature. But as reason begins to enlighten him, the work of creation begins. The intelligence within says to the will, "Let us make man." She urges the will, and the will sullenly leaves its favorite occupation of serving the passions and begins to mold animal man, in accordance with the divine image held up before him by wisdom. Let us make man means, let us make a divine man out of an animal man. Let us surround the divine ray within us with the purest of essences gathered from the lower planes. Let us throw off everything which is sensual and grossly material, and which hinders our progress. Let us transform the emotions into virtues in which the spiritual ray may clothe itself when it reascends to its throne. Let us make man. It depends entirely on our efforts what kind of a man we shall make. To make an average man, or even a superior one, in the common acceptation of the term, is not a very difficult matter. Follow the rules of health and the laws of diet. Provide above all for yourself and never give anything away, unless by doing so you are sure to get more in return. You will then make a respectable animal, a self-made man, prominent, independent and rich, one who lives and dies on the plane of selfishness, an object of envy for many, respected perhaps by many, but not by himself. But such is the influence of the higher nature in man, that even on that plane, an apparent unselfishness will often bring material reward. And while the inexorable miser is despised by all, he who occasionally confers little favours makes friends and may get his favours returned with interest. There is another class of self-made men, those who appear prominently on the intellectual plane. They stand before the world as the world's benefactors, as philosophers, teachers, statesmen, inventors, or artists. They have what is called genius, and instead of being mere imitators, they possess originality. They benefit themselves by benefiting the world. Intellectual researches that benefit no one are unproductive. They resemble physical exercise with dumbbells, by which muscular strength may be gained, but no labour accomplished. An intellectual pursuit may be followed for merely selfish purposes. But unless there is a love for the object of that study, little progress will be made, and instead of a sage, a bookworm will be the result. The majority of the learned live in their own darkness, seeking only for the fruits that others have gathered. But true genius is a magician who creates a world for himself and for others, and his light expands as he grows in perfection.